Okay, welcome to today's meeting of the local pension board. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Due to the current situation, this meeting is taking place virtually with members of the board alongside officers presenting reports joining online. Can I please ask that all members and officers have their microphone on mute until they wish or are invited to speak. When you are speaking, please also turn your video on. We have received apologies from Divya as employee representative, so Manjit Saroya is substituting as reserve employee representative, and we've got no other apologies. Our first order of business following the annual general meeting in December is election of chairman for the year until the next annual general meeting. Can I please have a nomination?
I nominate Mrs. Page.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Shepherd. And can I have a seconder?
Yes, I second that.
Is that agreed with everyone?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Over to you, Mrs. Page. Thank you.
Thank you very much and good morning. Welcome everybody on this snowy morning to the local pension board on the 8th of February. The second item on our agenda is the election of the vice chairman, and from the chair may I propose Mrs. Caroline Fairchild. Have I got a seconder? Mr.
Yes, Madam
Shepherd?
Chairman, I'll gladly second that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And that makes us both duly nominated. Good morning and welcome to everybody, and welcome Manjit. I cannot see you, but I'm assured you're there. So welcome. I can't see you. The third item on our agenda are the minutes from the 26th of October, which are on page 326 on your agenda. Have we got, and I'll take it slow and please bear with me because I'm chairing from home, as I said earlier on. So page 3, 4, 5, 6, no comments. May I sign these as a true record? Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. Thank you, Mrs. Pandlin. Item 4 on the agenda is the question time, and I haven't received any questions, and I don't think Kat has. Item 5 is to advise any other members which the chairman has decided to take as urgent, and I'm afraid there are none. Item 6 are the declarations of interest in respect of any items on the agenda, and it's Mr. Shepherd.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Last time I declared interest as a member of the Cabinet on the government proposals to reform local government exit pay. I don't think that's going to occur again on this agenda as far as I can see. Could I just ask advice from an officer? I couldn't spot where it was relevant, but if it is, I'd better declare another interest.
Well, I don't know, Kat, are there any? I haven't noticed, but why don't we just register your interest and then, you know, it is on record?
Well, if necessary, yes. I mean, I can see Ian is perhaps pondering
Ian?
the point.
I was going to mention it, Councillor Shepherd, just in the normal quarterly admin report, but
Right.
purely only in terms of explaining what the fund is doing in terms of the calculations.
Well,
Councillor
in that
Shepherd.
case, Madam Chairman, for the sake of bells and braces, I will formally declare. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and that means we are going to go to item 7. If Manjit is there, please.
He's still having a few issues, but I'm sorting them out behind the scenes.
Thank you, Kat. Well, so for all other members then, item 7, page 7, it runs up to page 58. Appendixes start on page 17. The large one is on page 27. And the purpose of this report is to inform the board of relevant issues in the administration of the fund and including the performance. And it's always a very good comprehensive report. And over to Ian to talk us through. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. It's Ian Howe, Pensions Manager, for the benefit of those people on YouTube. This is the quarterly report covering the period October to December. I don't propose going through every line. As usual, I will pick out the key parts, but feel free to ask any questions at any time. This covers the general workloads, which are shown on page 8. I would suggest that the key points to note there are the preserved benefits and aggregations remain higher than the target that we would ideally have in those areas. We are aware those areas have built up over the period. I will be honest, it's been a challenging period this last quarter, mostly again off the back of effectively COVID. Unfortunately, it has impacted again in certain areas, particularly around deaths, which are starting to rise again, unfortunately. But we have actually seen increases in other areas as well. Retirements remain quite high, but within target. But there is a lot of work coming into the section, and we're generally finding there's greater inquiries. We're receiving more inquiries than we had previously, and I think that might be because people are working from home. People are concerned about their finances or their finances of loved ones, and they're generally inquiring more and more about their pension benefits and when they can access them. So workloads are high in pensions at the moment. The point I was going to mention about the exit cap, as Councillor Shepherd mentioned at the beginning there, is point 7 in the report. This is the reforming of the local government exit pay, the 95 cap as it's known. In the report, it shows you how we're actually dealing with the different types of cases, i.e. those that do breach and those that don't. Just to sort of summarise this, because this is quite an important area here. For cases that breach the 95,000 cap, and you've got to remember that also includes the pension strain, the fund is offering either fully reduced benefits or preserved benefits, i.e. a pension that's taken at a future date. We know that is likely to generate appeals and complaints, but we are following the national guidance here. We're not doing this alone. This is what most funds in local government are taking. This is the approach they're using. And indeed, the Ombudsman and Local Government Association have worked in conjunction, and they know that this is going to generate appeals. And I think for the first time in my experience, the Ombudsman has actually provided wording specifically for this particular area, knowing that complaints are going to be generated, and we've incorporated that into our letters. For cases that don't breach the 95,000 cap, we're continuing to use the existing the process has changed, but the existing calculation methodology, but using the new strain calculation method. We're comfortable until the 30th of June to proceed along this line for cases that retire up to that point. In actual terms, we could probably go beyond the 30th of June now, because we understand the likelihood of the actual finalisation of the regulations taking place probably won't happen now until March, and you then have the 6 months protection window from March. So we're probably okay to extend that through to September, but I haven't made that judgment yet. I'm still being probably ultra cautious, but I'd rather be cautious than not, because I don't want to be overstating member benefits. But that's the procedure we're using at the moment. All the employers have been informed, and we've also done online sessions to the employers. My colleague Stuart has done that with some of my colleagues in the section, and they've been well received. So we're currently in a sort of a position of with a procedure, but we know that procedure will change when the regulations are finalised. Other things I just wanted to mention, the new pension structure came into effect from the 1st of January. Fire Pensions Administration has now moved across to West Yorkshire. So we have a new structure that came into place. The team managers are detailed in point 16. I think I wouldn't spend too long on that, but what we have done is we've made a particular conscious effort to have continued improvements and systems within one of the teams. So we're always striving to look for better ways of doing things and improving things for the customers. We've incorporated taxation into the payments team under Sue Hodson, because taxation is an ever increasing complex area and becoming a greater area of questions to us. So we're making a larger importance of that. Employers and iConnect, and you see the iConnect report every quarter. And the other one I want to just specifically mention is McLeod. We have a temporary team set up to deal with McLeod under Gary Featherston. That's a temporary team, and that's to help us manoeuvre our way through the McLeod ramifications and the calculations that will be required off the back of that. In terms of governance, I wasn't going to dwell particularly on governance. The complaints are in there. I wasn't going to particularly mention that. That's a fairly standard quarter, as is the implementation of the monthly postings, which are detailed in sections 20. I wasn't particularly going to go into detail on that, but feel free to ask any questions. The breaches log was something I did want to mention. You may recall, just to kind of backtrack slightly here, when we have any breaches, we have to record them on the breaches log, take them to the board, and then the board can consider whether anything is material. And if it is material, we then report it to the regulator. The issue I have with the current breaches are around the Prudential, who are our in-house AVC provider. Unfortunately, we are having quite major issues with the Prudential currently. They implemented a new admin system in the end of 2020, and it is creating some problems. It's generated some quite significant delays to a number of members who retired since October. Some of them have only just been finalised, almost 4 months late. So we've had some complaints off members around that. The latest issue, which is also a significant issue that I became aware of last week, is the Prudential haven't been investing contributions that have been paid across from the fund in a timely manner. So pension pots are currently incorrect, which means calculations are incorrect. Now, I've been liaising with the Prudential at a very senior level at this point, and they are very, very aware of this and are very apologetic, and they are striving to do absolutely everything to resolve this. So they are very aware and they want to resolve this, and this is key business. But they want to make you all aware they sincerely apologise, and they are very happy to attend the next board meeting if you would like them to talk through the issues they're having and also the improvement plan they're putting into place. Obviously, that's a board's decision, and I'm sorry that's not in the report, but this has literally happened over the weekend. I've been emailing them over through Saturday about this. The other points, just to mention, is the administration and communication strategy, which we bring through to the board normally annually, but at least every 2 years. There aren't any major significant changes within that. There are only really 2 changes. One is just to extend the iConnect deadline for the 77 remaining employers to the 31st of March 22, and the refresh wording in terms of the governance following the independent governance review, and that's to do with terms and conditions of the board. So nothing significant. So I don't propose we consult with the employers, but I thought it was at least good governance to make you aware of that. And I'm sorry I am going on. It's quite a long report, but I'm nearly finished, so bear with me. And the final point I wanted to mention was the TUPE, the list of the TUPE employers that we have in each of the quarterly board reports. What I would like to say on this is since the implementation of the new structure, and employers and iConnect are now managed by one team manager, Dean Campbell, and working with Derek, we've made some really significant progress in this quarter. And the two long-running problems, both Beacon Academy, have both been resolved. And we've managed to actually resolve 7 cases in the last quarter, which is really impressive. And I'm really pleased with the progress we've made. The one that was concerning me most on the list is on page 15, which was the Hinckley Academy in John Cleveland, sixth form college to Caterlink. I'm now pleased to be able to report, since this report was written, we have now managed to establish they want to move to pass through. They have completed the forms and they are now actively engaging. We've also established there are only 2 members of staff that transferred over, and there is no requirement for a bond because they're quite young in age, which is helpful. So the risk is actually very low. And this is now being resolved. And we have informed those 2 members of staff as well, so they are aware of the delays. So that really, Chair, was what I wanted to kind of cover in terms of a summary. I hope that was useful, and obviously I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'll go over to Richard in a minute, who had his hand up. First of all, welcome, Manjit. We've noticed you have now joined the meeting. I'm Rosita Page, your chairman. Do put your hand up and ask questions whenever you feel it's fit. But Ian is a very, well, he writes the best, most comprehensive reports, so everything you find within it, and he does give good explanations, but do ask at any time, just put your hand up. And usually what we do is, unless we want to speak, we keep our cameras and microphones off. Try not to put too much into the chat, because all the chat box can be FOI'd. Now, Ian, thank you again for your comprehensive report. A couple of questions before I go over to Richard. First of all, do give our appreciation to the staff, because we can see they are working flat out. And on that note, you did say at the last meeting you were going to get extra staff. So did you get your team increased, or are they still struggling? So my second question is, you said the structure moved to West Yorkshire on the 1st of January. Are there any impacts? And how does that affect us? I think you're going, the iConnect comes up later. And on my little note, I had catering link, which you explained, but the one underneath it, officers have chased, it's a David Ross education. Is there any update on that? And then once you answer that, I'll go over to Richard. And again, thank you very much for a comprehensive report. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. First point, yes, we've increased the staff by four temporary staff initially on 1-year contracts. The first 2 started just before Christmas. The second 2 started on the 18th of January. So that's really good. And we are really pleased with the progress the 4 of them are making. They've done really well. It's not been easy with the training, with them having we're all working from home, so that's a little bit more challenging than it would normally be. But we are really pleased with the progress of the 4 new staff, and they will really help us. So yes is the answer to that, Chair. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm glad that it helps. Thank you.
In terms of the transfer of fire on the 1st of January to West Yorkshire, that was for the 3 fire authorities, Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire and Derbyshire fire authorities. That went really well, and a lot of credit there must go to my technical colleagues, particularly Ian Potter and Stuart Wells, who worked really hard on making sure that data transferred over. That went across, the digital data went across at the end of November, and any paper and fiches went across to West Yorkshire in December. And that has moved incredibly well. The project was very smooth and there weren't really any problems at all. So yes, I'm delighted to say that is helping. In terms of the 2 staff who were working on fire, they've moved across to the local government team to help us, and they're working on the early leavers team, and that's Eleanor and Les, and they're very experienced local government members of staff as well, so they will also really help us. But they are, to be fair, getting back up to speed with local government because they have been doing fire for a while, but that's a really beneficial move for us. Thank you, Chair. The third question you asked about David Ross to Caterlink. No, there hasn't been any more progress on that, but they are engaging with us, and that is one of the areas that we are working actively with them to resolve. It isn't, I don't fear that this one is going to be a problem like some of the others we've encountered, but it is maybe taking longer than I'd anticipate. But I think some of that is problems to do with COVID and getting signatures and home working. So that one is working through, Chair, to be honest.
Thank you, because I'm sure you would have mentioned if there are any problems. So it all looks positive and we don't need to write any letters or anything.
No,
okay,
no,
thank
so,
you.
Thank
and
you.
Over to Richard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. 2 points. On the exit cap, yes, of course, the Cabinet, of course, responded as an employer, and I see reference to employers, of course, as in the item. So yes, of course, my declaration of interest is relevant. And secondly, I welcome Ian's comments about the bonds, which was a bit of a concern, I think. So those are my 2 points, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Right. Ian, do you want to respond to anything, or can I go to Ruth?
No, I'm
okay.
Happy with that.
So it's Ruth followed by Elaine. Over to Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, may I ask, on the report in paragraph 5, where you detail the case workload, the maximum number of cases at the month end differs by month, and I just wondered why that was, if it was a target, why it varies.
Yeah, it's a good question, Ruth, and they do vary by month, and it's because we work on a cyclical basis. There are areas that sort of increase at certain times of the year. So, for example, aggregations is a good example of that. What happens with aggregations is we stall them for a while during year-end work, Ruth.
Right.
So we concentrate on year end. So we know that things like aggregations and new starters start to build in the background, and then they start to peak, and they should peak really in about October time. And then we should be able to move the resource through to them to then catch up. So they then bring them down through November, December into January. So we get back to a position ready for the next year end. But we aren't able to this year. We're further behind than we'd ideally like, and that's some of the reason we've asked for the additional staff, Ruth, to try and catch up, because we are aware that some of the areas are higher than they should be, and also we're expecting another. Well, we're not expecting. We've got a new year end coming in 2 months' time, so we are up against it. So that's the reason, Ruth. Does that help?
It does, yes, thank you. And then my second question was just in relation to the exit cap. Are you able to give any context to the number of cases that may impact on in terms of the total membership?
Yeah, good. That's a really good question. In terms of those going over the exit cap, Ruth, it's really difficult to say. I don't anticipate there'll be many, Ruth. I know that's not helpful, really very helpful.
No, I just wondered whether,
But I don't think there'll be many. I'm only aware of 2 cases that we've had so far, and they are only really, I wouldn't even say estimates, Ruth. They're almost just inquiries. I don't think that we can even say they're going to necessarily proceed, Ruth. Under 95k, ultimately, it will affect everybody who goes on with a redundancy or efficiency strain cost, Ruth, because the strain will come off. The redundancy value will come off the strain, so it will mean an element of the strain which would have been paid to give an unreduced benefit will make that benefit or part of that benefit reduced. So it will impact on everybody, and I think that's really the main stumbling block in terms of getting approval of this. And this is why we've got, I think, so many kind of complaints around this, not within the funder. I'm talking at a national level, Ruth, because understandably, groups like the unions, for example, are clearly unhappy about this. So as it currently stands, Ruth, it will affect anybody who goes on redundancy or efficiency over 55, clearly, who would have had previously unreduced benefits. They'll have an element of the benefit reduced. So it's far-reaching, Ruth.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you, Ruth. Elaine, and Ruth, can you please take your hand down so I know when you want to ask the next question?
Yes, will do.
Thank you. Elaine, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ian, for that report. You do really make sense of it. You know, sometimes when you're reading through it, it's really difficult, but thank you for that. One of the things that I wanted to ask was, you know, you talk about the iConnect and there's, you know, there's some people have not connected with it as yet. What advice and help do you give them, you know, encourage them to sort of get on with it, as it were?
That's a good question, and thank you for that. We actually do a lot of help on this area. We initially provide a specification layout that we ask them to basically populate with data from their payroll systems. Sometimes we then end up liaising with their payroll provider, because they sometimes outsource their payroll. So we liaise with the payroll provider. Once we have an extract in terms of that data, we then do sort of test runs. So we run a test report through our system to see how many errors it's going to generate. And normally, Councillor Paitlin, it generates errors first time because there's kind of a data match that's required. Once the first data match has been completed, then it tends to run much more smoothly. So it's normally the first hurdle, which is the biggest hurdle, is the implementation. Once it's implemented, it tends to run reasonably smoothly, apart from where councils or employers change payroll systems, because then you effectively have to rebuild it and you have to start again. But we do a lot of testing. We liaise with the employers. We've even done some of the data loading for the employers ourselves to help them. And we found that some of the employers it actually helps us by doing that too, which wasn't the initial intention, I'll be honest, when we first started this process, but we do that to actually help avoid errors at year end. So we smooth the process. My 2 colleagues that deal with this the most, there's a lady in our team called Geraldine O'Neill, and she is the kind of the key person, and she's the sort of the person who liaises with the employers the most. And then there's a couple of other colleagues that help her. So we do help the employers quite considerably on the initial data load, and once that's done and that's tested, it's really then more the employer responsibility. Is that okay?
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was very interesting. Thank you for that question, Elaine. Now, I cannot, hang on a minute, who else got a hand up? Hang on, I have to go, bear with me, I can't see. I have to go into my...
I think it's Manjit, Councillor Page.
Oh, good. You can see it. Okay,
so.
over to Manjit, please. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Just a quick question on the, Ian, you mentioned yourself, and I know we've discussed it with regards to the prudential challenges that we've had. I think it's a good idea to get them, ask them to, if the board agree as well, to get them in to express our own views to them directly face to face, and also suggest maybe how they can improve things and what mitigations they can take, because the example you gave, Ian, was really valid. The fact that, okay, they had some problems, IT problems, etc., but we'd like to understand what their mitigations were so that this type of thing doesn't happen again. And from an IT perspective, in my own background, I can maybe make suggestions to them if need be as well, as part of that meeting. So, yeah, I think it'd be a great idea to get them on board and just to understand what their challenges are. They understand what ours are because you've eloquently put them to them anyway. But I think that them being a strategic partner to us, and I think there's 1,000 members.
There's about 1,000 members who pay AVCs actively into the scheme, so it's a considerable amount of money. It's a big benefit to local government scheme members. I completely echo that.
And also, what I want to avoid is that even though there's only a handful of cases, because your team manage it really well, Ian, those handful of cases could impact on people's ability to get their money in a timely fashion, especially when Prudential are committed to providing it in a timely manner and they haven't managed to. So that impact on the individuals is quite important, and they need to, I'm sure they will acknowledge it, we need to maybe put it forward to them again, just to say, okay, all of these issues and challenges we know you acknowledge, but what is a mitigation in the future going forward? So that's just a suggestion, please, Chair. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We have not previously invited people to our board. I am not dismissing it because it might be a good idea, but before we give you an answer, I will discuss it with Ian offline. We see how the process and the challenges, and we will report back. It would actually maybe, we will consider it for the sake of it. Okay. And to thank you for that suggestions. Very good. Could you please take your hand down so I know, because it's very difficult otherwise to see. Now, I cannot see any other hands.
Chair, you've put yourself on mute.
On. Yes, oh, so sorry. MS, the hand is up. So please ask your question, whoever MS is. No MS?
Sorry, Chair, I'm trying to get it down.
Oh, that is Manjit. Sorry.
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to get it down and it's...
Oh, it's all right.
Flashing back up again.
Kat, can you take it down for him, please? You came up as guest before, so you confused me because you're now MS. I can see no other hands. If there are no further questions, we will now move to the next report.
Sorry, excuse me, sorry to interrupt you, Chair, but it does look like Ruth's hand's up, so I don't know whether she's...
No, it looks as though it's down on my screen.
Oh, it was up on mine, Ruth, sorry.
Oh, right.
Chair, do forgive me for that rude interruption.
No, that is quite all right. Richard's hand has come up again. Richard, but you're on mute, Richard. Richard, unmute yourself.
Chairman, yes, sorry about that. Chairman, shouldn't we perhaps just formally note the reports, all areas of the report, as on paragraph 38?
Yes, we will do in a minute. I just wanted to make sure that there are no further questions and everybody has had a turn to ask questions. So definitely no hands up, everybody. So we are going to note this report as in, we are noting the report. So the report is noted. Everybody okay with that? I can see thumbs up and nods. Yes. So everybody is happy. And we then move on to page 59, which is item 8. of your agenda, and that report, the purpose of the report, it is again to inform you of the proposals to amend the fund's funding strategy statement and the changes. Page 70 are supporting documents. This came into force in September of last year, and Ian will talk you again through his very comprehensive report. And I mute myself and hand over to Ian Howe.
Thank you, Chair. This stems from a regulation change that took place in September last year. What I would start by saying is we assess employer risk as part of the valuation, which is every 3 years. And obviously you're aware that we look at the bonds and things of that nature from previous reports, which are in the quarterly admin report that comes through to you. But this is a specific regulation change that requires the fund to have a policy on certain employer risks and exits. The regulations introduce 3 areas, and they are effectively allowing an employer to request a review of their employer contribution rate, and that is outside of the 3-year valuation period. It's not something that the fund is proposing that we will allow as a regular request, because that's the purpose of the fund valuation. But the fund is minded to allow reviews in one exceptional circumstance, and that is where an employer is in genuine financial difficulty, and this option would actually increase the chance of repayment. In order for that to happen, the employer would need to provide evidence of the reason why they would request this, and there are a number of other items and areas that they would have to meet, and we would work through that with them. We would take the case to the pensions committee for consideration as well. It's not something we would allow this to take place lightly, in truth, but we would allow it in that exceptional instance. The other 2 areas that the regulation changed were the spreading of exit payments. So this is when an employer leaves the scheme. So this is when an employer terminates. And if there's a deficit at the point of the termination, the fund calculates what that deficit value is. And usually what happens is the employer will then pay that value as a single amount. But there are occasions when employers may not be able to make that payment in full. And this allows a spreading of that value. So it spreads the exit payment. Now, again, it's something that the fund isn't sort of particularly keen to do, because we'd rather have the money up front, you know, at the point where the employer's left, and that also allows the employer to then walk away. But we accept there are extreme circumstances when that might not be able, when an employer may not be able to do that. And again, it's to do with sort of the financial situation of the employer. So if they're in financial difficulty and this increases the chance of repayment, then the fund will work with the employer to allow that. What we would insist is we would insist on a legal document in place to protect both ourselves as the fund and indeed the employer that's making the payment, because what we wouldn't want is for that cost to then not be paid and then ultimately get spread across the other employers in the fund, which would be grossly unfair. We would also want security in place in terms of a bond or something of that nature as well during that repayment period. So again, it's not something we promote particularly, but we will allow it in exceptional circumstances. And the third option is something called a deferred debt agreement. This is similar in nature to the second option, but the key difference is that we wouldn't actually produce a crystallization termination value. So what that effectively means is, rather than crystallize the debt, which you do in the second option, this effectively keeps the employer linked to future valuations, which means that that debt value could increase or it could decrease depending on what's happening in the markets. Again, not something the fund is particularly keen on, and this is probably the least favoured option in truth of the fund, but it would allow it to happen again if the fund thought the employer was in real financial difficulty, and even though in the second option would cause them financial problems. We would allow, again backed with a security of a legal document and security as a bond, but what we would also wish to do is crystallize the debt and make it into effectively the second option, which is the spreading the exit payments, as soon as we possibly could. So what we've done, we've taken this to committee. Committee looked at this in January. We've made some proposed changes to the funding strategy statement, which are in the appendix that the chair mentioned. And this is currently with the employers for a consultation. The consultation runs to the end of February, and then I will look to see what replies I've had back from the employers, and then I will make the final version of the funding strategy statement with any comments considered. We will then make that policy, the fund policy change. We'll take it to committee for approval, and we will let the board know of that final policy decision. So that's really a summary of how we're treating it, Chair. Obviously, happy to take any questions at all.
Thank you, Ian. Again, very comprehensive. So just tell me what would be your preferred option if you've had a choice. And secondly, you in the option, you just refer to things like timetable, etc. I suppose once the policy is formed in detail, you will make all of these things more succinct, i.e. 9 days and whatever, and you give a very clear outline so there will be no legal challenges or confusion at the end. Yes, and that is all I've got to ask you for now. And for everybody else, before I go asking for hands up, there is a glossary of terms on page 110, which I found extremely useful. Now, over to Richard with the first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I spotted in, I think it's Appendix D, reference to general communication still being paper-based. So I'm interested really in the fund's approach to using paper as opposed to using electronic means.
Can you just direct me to which page that's on, Councillor Shepherd?
Yeah, I'm just looking at my notes here. It was Appendix D, page 14.
Page 14. Is this in the previous report, Councillor? In the admin and comm strategy? Yes.
I thought I found it in item 8. I beg your pardon. Have I got it in the wrong place?
I think.
I beg your pardon. Yes, you're quite right. Item 7. I beg your pardon. My own note is wrong. I put down 8 rather than 7.
It's employer's risk on this report. Yes. Page 14.
Yes, my own notes. I made a mistake there. I'm so sorry.
No problem. That's okay, Councillor Shepherd. In terms of the paper-based, we definitely want to move away from it as much as we possibly can, Councillor. But we do still allow members who don't want digitised information to receive paper. So particularly some of like the pensioners and some of the people who don't want digitised annual benefit statements, we do allow them to still request paper, Councillor. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Madam Chairman, for
yes,
that.
and I'm very glad because I happen to like paper. Richard, hand, please. Are there any other hands, any other questions from any other member?
In terms of your answering your points, Councillor Page, if I may, our preferred option will still be to have the single one-off payment. In truth, that's what we'd still prefer, but we will allow the spreading if there's a real reason that we think financially that would help the employers, Councillor. And you're absolutely right. The legal document to accompany this will show the repayment terms and things of that nature. Is that okay?
Yes,
just to put your mind at it.
Yes, thank you very much. And while you were talking, no hands have appeared. So that means everybody is blissfully happy. And the recommendation on page 65.43, it is for all to note. Are there any dissensions? And there is nothing I can see. So that again is noted with a lot of nods. Thank you very much. And we are now, hang on, I will go to item 9, which is the business plan, which is on page 115 to 128. And I welcome Declan to the committee to introduce this report. And there he is, looking dapper as always. Good morning, Declan.
Morning, Chair. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're looking dapper yourself.
I hope you're not snowed in.
No, it's quite light here, to be honest. It's just blowing around, so it's not too bad at all.
Yeah, same here. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, so the report mainly covers the budget. So I was just going to, in advance of it going to the committee for approval, so I was mainly just going to do a summary of the budget. The business plan for the section's also appended, but I won't talk through that. I've just assumed everybody's read it. So in terms of the budget itself, it is pretty similar in truth to last year. The main change that have been reflected is off the back of a review of the pension section, which resulted in a new structure and the implementation of the McLeod remedy, which is really a small temporary team to start with, although most of that team does then just get sort of absorbed back into the main sort of structure. And one bit I would want to highlight, and it's I suppose an important difference when we're talking about pensions, is normally when we talk about reviews at the county council, it does end up in a bit of a reduction in costs, but that's not the case for the pension fund. The pension fund does benefit from separate funding streams from the county council. So the same funding pressures don't exist. So that said, we still are aware that it's public money that funds the whole of the sort of the pension arrangements. We do try to keep costs as low as sort of is sensible to do, but it's not that same kind of requirement to make kind of forced savings, as it were. It's more about good use of money. So we could draw the board's attention to the table at the top of page 117. This just summarise the budget. And apologies, there is a small mistake on there. You'll see the £0 on the sort of second row down. That should be pounds thousands. It's just a formatting error. And the top sort of half or third of that table just shows the investment management expenses, and these are driven by the kind of the level of assets that we hold as a fund. So how much money basically the fund has got invested. And the transfer to central is having a little bit of an effect on this, but in terms of actually bringing those costs down, it is quite a slow impact. So the growth in the assets is always going to outstrip the sort of the savings that we make on a penny per sort of pound invested basis. And it's part of the reason that progress is slow is the level of assets we move each year is actually quite a small percentage. It's spread over several years of transition to central, but also the kind of the savings you make at first are offset by transaction costs. And you don't normally notice this on your own sort of day-to-day dealings, but when you're moving kind of hundreds of millions of pounds, the costs are quite onerous, and they do stack up to a few £1 million. You actually sort of shift the market as well, so it can be sort of something you only do sort of very rarely, but those savings will build up over a period of time. And the next sort of after the investment section, you'll see the Lgps costs, and these split into two types really. You've got the we pay central for managing assets on behalf, and that forms part of that top third in the investment management section. And that's where the bulk of the costs go. We might have previously paid an investment manager, now we pay central. So it's just, one cost in, one cost out sort of thing. But we do pay for the sort of the government arrangements. It's almost like an access fee to Lgps Central, but that tends to just be staff costs, the cost of the board, things like that. So it's the people who aren't necessarily directly involved in that kind of the assets itself. And it's just staffing costs. And then the final third down there is kind of more the sort of the team cost, the stuff that sort of Ian sort of directly looks after. And you'll see the kind of it's split into sort of staffing, IT, etc. And you'll notice the sort of the biggest increase in there is the sort of the team costs between kind of 2020-21 and the proposed budget. And that's basically reflecting the sort of the restructuring, the McLeod remedy that I just mentioned earlier. You'll notice the other costs have pretty much been held or kind of just sort of standard inflation amounts. The one to pull out on there that's probably got the most level of estimation on is the actuarial costs. It's out to tender at the moment, so that could change a bit, but hopefully it'll kind of hopefully it's not going to be up, but we'll have to see. And there's small percentages there at the bottom of the table, just draw your attention to. That's just the costs of the fund divided by the level of assets that you'd hold. And you would expect this to decline each year just because the kind of sort of some costs of the fund are fairly fixed, and the assets can grow quite strongly. You will see that that percentage dropping down. So it is something we always keep a bit of an eye on to make sure that decline is happening. So that was just a quick run through of the budget. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, very comprehensive. Before any questions from members on the first part of the report, Declan, explain a couple of things to me, please. Under IT cost, point 24, it says the current 500 each year increased for inflation. Does that mean it is always already, that is the inflation, or it will increase with inflation? I don't get that point, because it says each year, comma, and then increase for inflation, probably being a bit dim there. So, and yeah, then the second point, it's also just for point 29. It says over 90% of the budget is spent on investment manager related expenses. Yes, I understand it. We have to pay them. But just for my little brain, is that, I know we have to pay them, it's an ongoing, but is it kind of, and I know we have to, but how does that work? Is it value for money? Is it, how does that relate? I mean, just talk me through this for my little brain box.
Okay.
Thank you.
The first one, the IT inflation, if you look at that table on the top of page 117, you'll see the IT line goes from 500 to 510 to 520. So that's just the contract increasing each year by, I'm not sure what the inflation measure is, it's normally CPI, something like that. So it's just that gradual uplift each year. So that's all that one is. And then the second one around the investment management expense. Again, if you look on page 117, you've got three types of costs there. You've got the management cost, which is just basically paying the manager. And I'm trying to think, apart from a couple of our managers, we pay them on a percentage of assets that they manage. And it's kind of the value for money is a good question, and it's taken a lot of focus recently. And you've got choices in sort of how you invest your assets. You've got your first choice is, do you go active or passive? And the government have really pushed quite strongly on this, that they expect funds to be able to justify whether you go active management. So the difference is quite big as well. You might pay 0.1% for passive management, but you might pay, I don't know, 0.6, 0.7% for active management. And passive management is you just let it track a benchmark. Active management is you're paying someone to do research, identify companies, invest in those companies, engage with those companies, etc. So it's quite a big difference. So we do review each year. Can we justify that we maintain that sort of split? And the fund primarily targets the active management areas it thinks it makes a difference. This is around private equity, where you're dealing with really small funds, maybe not small companies, maybe where not a lot's known about the companies. Whereas if we were to invest in the bigger companies that are publicly listed, we tend to go passive management because it's quite hard for a manager to get an advantage. So that first decision, I think we're pretty much okay on that. We're not big active kind of players, although we have done it increasingly interestingly, because as Central have brought the cost down of active management, it's made more sense to do it. And then that brings you into the second choice is, what you've exactly touched on there. Is that manager adding value for money? And this is where sort of pooling's really sort of coming into its own, that we can see what everybody's paying across 8 different funds. We're going out for tender with a much bigger kind of asset pool. So for example, Leicestershire, at a £4.5 billion fund, only makes up about 10% of the assets of LGPS Central. So you can see suddenly, the attractiveness to the market has gone up a lot. So, and we're seeing those kind of those costs coming down by about 25%. So at the moment, it's kind of we're getting that sort of value for money sort of through Central. It's going well so far. We did do the final one on the passive ones, which we haven't done with Central. Before Central launched, and it was before my time, to be honest, 7 different counties got together and did a big tender exercise with Legal in General, and that brought the passive costs down to a very low level. We don't pay very much at all with them, to be honest. So in answer to your question, I suppose it's one that we need to keep looking at and keep challenging ourselves. But the pooling process we're going through with Central is seeing good results so far. So we're pretty happy we're getting that balance right. But every year, we should be challenging ourselves on that one.
Thank you. That was very interesting. Thank you. Over to Ruth, who's got her hand up. Thank you.
Thank you. Morning, Declan.
Morning, Ruth.
It just really follows on from the question that Councillor Page asked. Is it possible to do any benchmarking in terms of the costs of Leicestershire's fund against other comparable funds, or is it because the asset base is quite different that's quite tricky to do?
You can do I suppose on one level, managers will tell you kind of how different their kind of fund is, and they'll sort of give you a bit of sort of smoke and mirrors. But at the end of the day, as far as the fund's concerned, we want to invest in, I don't know, it might be private equity or a global fund or infrastructure. So you can at a sort of a higher level sort of do that sort of that comparison. And the other piece that does make it harder is, you can get any manager you want really cheaply, but the good managers tend to cost a bit more. So there's that sort of that cost of the fees versus the performance. So the benchmarking we do you can do sort of wider benchmarking, but we haven't done that for a few years, mainly because of the conclusion we got is, well, what are we going to do with the information that comes back? And the honest answer at the moment is nothing, because of pooling. If a manager's expensive, they're getting taken out of the picture anyway. So we're not going to swap a manager beforehand, because it can take 5 years to repay those transaction costs. So we don't do any of the broader market benchmarking. But every time we do a new fund launch with Central, it effectively does that market testing and making sure we're on track. And Central have done a bits with us as well about paying these sort of external companies who really dig into the costs. And it sounds like it shouldn't be difficult, but it is, because there's layers and layers of costs in these things. So you get specialists in occasionally to just dig right down into the costs and make sure we fully understand what we're doing. So when we do go out to market, we're capturing all the costs, everything's getting taken into account. So does that give you the sort of the assurance you're after?
What about on the admin side, the actual pension administration side? Do you do any benchmarking around those costs?
The main measure on that tends to be, and it comes up quite a bit when we're doing the sort of the triennial assessment, is kind of what's the percentage of the employer contributions that we make? And I think it's referred to in the report, and I have to admit, I forget whether it's 0.2% or 0.3%. And so you do look at other funds for what they're doing.
0.3, Declan.
Is it 0.3? Thank you, Ian. So
0.3.
Yeah. And it tends, some of the bigger funds, if you take something like West Midlands, who are into the Central pool with us, their asset base is over twice the size of ours. So you would expect West Midlands to be cheaper than us, but for sort of funds of a comparable size, we're pretty much in the same sort of ballpark. But again, it's important to kind of keep, Ian's going out to the market with the actuary to kind of keep them on the toes. He did the new system a few years ago, and it gives him a few opportunities to just keeps trying to bring the costs down, because the thing we find with pensions is it's just regulatory costs are just forever putting new pressures on the section. So you've got to find new things that are going to help to kind of mitigate some of those costs. So we seem to be okay. I can't remember whether do you do any other benchmarking, Ian? Or
the last time I looked at it, Ruth, and this was going back quite a long time, to be honest, so it's probably a little bit out of date, but we were quite comfortably placed in terms of sort of overall cost in comparison to other sort of local funds, but I don't know how wide that would go, Ruth, to be honest. But it's something I feel we're quite comfortable on in terms of our position. I know a number of funds have a higher admin cost than ours, but I'm sure some have a lower. But I think you have to also balance that against the service quality. And I am very aware of some funds that do have a lower admin cost. I certainly wouldn't want to be managing one of those, because the backlog of cases and the problems they encounter, I would certainly not feel as though that's money well spent, to be honest. So I think it's a balance, and it's something that we have to be very mindful of.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there are no other hands up on this. Do you just want to move on to the business plan, starting on page 121, and have a quick word on that, Declan, please? Let me just check. No other hands up. Yes, move over to the business plan then. Thank you, Declan.
Okay, to be honest, Chair, I wasn't going to talk through the detail, but the structure is the same as we've had in previous years, and I think most of the points on there are points Ian he tends to bring up as part of his admin section. So it's really just sort of setting out the what the section's trying to achieve in the year, and a handful of kind of the main sort of items. So happy to take sort of questions, but I wasn't going to talk through the detail.
Yes, it's fairly self-explanatory, but are there any questions from any of the members? And again, I see no hands up. You're getting, hang on, that is Elaine. Elaine, your hand is up, over to you.
It's not really a question, Chair. It's just a comment, really, and I wanted to say thank you, Declan, for the report that you gave earlier, and also the way that you've explained the budget and this plan is very clear. It's really interesting, because often, when you go to these other meetings and they use lots of academia, what I have noticed with finance, that the narrative is really clear. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. So, all right, thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you for that.
Well, I'm afraid, Elaine, poor old Declan has to deal with the likes of me, and I won't understand it if he doesn't make it simple. There are no, Manjit hand has popped up, so over to Manjit, please.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Hi, Declan, how you doing?
Hi, Manjit.
Just, it might be a silly question, Declan, but just reading through the business plan and budget, there's, and it's the first time I've seen it, so just again, apologies if it's something you already answered in previous meetings, but it talks about the sort of, in one line, the favoured option for engagement activity with greater ring fencing and, of Lgps with the existing structures, greater separation of the pension fund management from the host authority. Is there anything sort of you want to say about that in terms of impact going forward, or is that still under consideration? Or
so just for your benefit, Manjit, it was probably 2 years ago. The kind of this.
There you go.
This whole process sort of started off, and there's an organisation called a Scheme Advisory Board, and what they do is they kind of look across the local government pension sort of scheme landscape as a whole.
Yeah. And
they commissioned a review which, to be honest, was following up on a review that happened sort of years before that kind of instigated pooling, to just basically have a look at the governance arrangements that were in place. So they commissioned Hymans Robinson, who are our scheme actuary, to sort of just have a look at some of the recommendations, and one of them was kind of the how close should the fund be? And I think this came off the back of austerity, really. And you did see some organisations doing daft things about kind of, if they put a pay freeze or a recruitment freeze on the rest of the organisation, they were doing the same on the pension fund. And forgetting the problem Ian's always got with his sort of area is kind of, pensioners don't really care if sort of the local authority has kind of, got a financial problem. They want their pension issues sorted.
Yeah.
The number of scheme members is kind of relentlessly increasing. So if I sort of say to Ian, take 10% out of your budget, he's gonna sink. So that was a concern of the scheme advisory board, that people were making daft decisions, and we've kept that locally. We've kept that degree of separation sort of okay. Ian's in his team is pretty close to the local authority, but he doesn't get wrapped up in the same kind of decisions and the same kind of problems that the county council are having to face. So when they started talking about the separation, we didn't like it when they talked about complete separation, because we thought that was just adding administrative cost.
Yeah.
So if you set up like a separate legal entity that was completely separate, so we're okay with the kind of the halfway house that they've proposed, where it's kind of he's still part of the organisation, but it just makes it clearer what you should or shouldn't do as a sort of a pension fund. So to be honest, we're okay with how it looks to be coming out. The final report got delayed because of COVID, and I think some other things as well. But it looks like it's going to be okay so far.
So there are no major changes planned. Then that's fine. Okay.
There'll be some, because they are trying to. I suppose that was the separation was one piece of it, and the biggest change is probably going to be every other year we're going to have an independent review. Yeah. So that's going to be interesting. So you can imagine the first time we get that independent review, we're going to get like a dozen improvement points to work on. But hopefully, when that sort of beds in, it'll be okay. But that's probably the biggest change I can think of.
I was sort of, just from my perspective, to the same point that you made, worried or concerned about the additional costs if there was that separation and different entities and bodies and how they work together and stuff like that. So thanks for that. That's answered the question. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Manjit.
Right. Page 120, point 31, recommendation. It is recommended the board notes the business plan and the proposed pension fund budget 2021-22. Can we please all note? And it is noted with thumbs up by everybody. And thank you very, very much, Declan. Have a lovely day. And as always, very much appreciated. We are now moving on to item 10, which is on page 129. And of course, those are the changes relating to the risk management and internal controls and the risk register, which again is Ian Howe. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is the standard fund risk register that goes to each board and committee meeting. We've summarised the changes, of which there are only two, and they are actually both positive changes in terms of the risk has been removed. The first one being the fire administration, which, as I said earlier, actually in the earlier report, has now gone across to West Yorkshire. So that's been done successfully. So that risk has now been removed. And the other one, which was a concern earlier last year, if you recall, was when we were starting to move into year end in April and May time last year, was when COVID was really at its peak, and we were struggling in terms of getting information from some of the scheme employers, because some of the employers were shut. And getting year-end information was a little bit more troublesome than in previous years. But I'm pleased to say the data did come in, and all the statutory deadlines were met in terms of the annual benefit statements and taxation statements. So that risk has been removed. The other risks are as detailed in the appendix, with the current risk score, and then once the mitigation has taken place, which are the sort of the actions we take to try and reduce those risks, the residual risk score, which is to the right hand side of the appendix, the second in column. So that's all I was going to really mention, Chair, unless anybody has any questions.
Yes, Richard has. Thank you for that, Ian, and over to Richard.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A number of the amber risks have been reduced, of course, to green as residual risks, but some still do remain at amber. Okay, it's, if you like, only amber. But could Ian comment on those bonds that do remain as amber as residual risks, please, and whether we should be concerned about that, or is the direction of travel still going to be downwards?
I might have to ask my colleague Declan to come in on some of those, because I think some of them relate more to the investment side, which I'm afraid I'm not so close on. Declan, would you mind coming in on some of those for me?
There's number 9, for instance, I notice, and number 10 are still remaining as amber.
Yeah, number 9 is the
Residual risk
assets.
column.
Yeah, assets held by the fund are ultimately insufficient to pay benefits. And
Declan
Could you-
is online.
Declan, are you on mute?
But
Declan?
he's muted.
Sorry,
Unmute yourself.
I was muted twice. In terms of that one, that is one that's likely to always remain amber, just because it reflects the potential volatility in the kind of the investment markets. And I think it's reinforced a bit by the fact that we're circa 90% funded at the moment. Now we've got a funding sort of or a deficit reduction plan that on average is sort of in the region of sort of 17 years. So it's one of those. It's felt it's been managed and it's in hand. But I mean, as you saw with sort of COVID, it can overnight, you can lose 25% of your scheme assets, which can really sort of set you back a long time. So I think that is one that's it's not a concern that we're doing anything particularly risky. Our fund's pretty well balanced, it's pretty well diversified, but it is one that you've always got to be aware of is going to create problems, or has the potential to create problems rather.
Sorry, was that 9 or 10? I beg your pardon.
That was 9.
Yes.
And then 10, the sub-funds of employees not managed. I mean, again, it's a shifting external landscape really on this one. So on a monthly basis, we receive most of the money in. So you get that kind of, I suppose you get the basic transactional stuff of the cash coming in. But on an individual employer basis, things can kind of change quite a bit. So you could have and Ian will have seen this more than sort of me. If you get an employer who kind of goes overboard with doing things like ill health retirements or giving a lot of sort of internal promotions to staff, it can create sort of big deficits, but it's quite hard to manage on an individual sort of employer by employer basis. You only really get the good flush through when you do your triennial review. So it's one that can kind of, although there's controls and measures in place to kind of keep an eye on these things, you can get individual kind of employer bodies kind of drifting a little bit. And then it's only really, like say, when you reset the sort of the employer contributions level on that triennial basis, you pull back into place. So, the amberness reflects the fact that we can't control everything, I suppose. Is there anything you'd add to that, Ian?
Yeah, there is. Thank you, Declan.
Thank you. It's also number 11, I notice.
Did Ian just want to come in on number 10, Mr. Shepherd?
I just one extra thing, Councillor Shepherd, on that one. For example, I think the ill health is a good example of that. We have a kind of an ill health allowance for those employers that aren't insured, and we monitor that every quarter. And those employers that have gone above the kind of the allowance, which is 1% of pensionable pay, we alert them, giving them the option to make payment or not. So I think the risk remains because they may choose not to, which is entirely their choice. They don't have to, but then it would, as Declan says, then get incorporated into the valuation at the next sort of cycle. So yeah, we kind of mitigate in terms of managing or allowing the alerting, I think is probably a better way of describing it. But it's entirely an employer's decision ultimately.
Thank you. And I think number 11, I think also is in this same, isn't it? Amber category still as residual.
Sorry, when I looked at 9, I only looked at the first one about the assets, and I assumed it was the wrong one. So if you can assume my answer to number 9 was the answer to number 11,
right? And
then I'll give you the answer to number 9 now, which is more the kind of the other side of the equation. So when we set the employer contribution rates, there's a whole heap of assumptions. And some around things like inflation, how long people are going to live for, the level of pay rises people get, the level of sort of promotion within the fund. So there's a whole host of different sort of assumptions that we have to make. So all that risk is basically saying is the chances of you getting all those risks, all those assumption right is pretty kind of pretty slim. So when we set those employer contribution rates, we do it for a 3-year period so that the employers have got a bit of certainty. But actually, we know those rates are going to be wrong. We do different things. We put a bit of contingency in there and stuff like that. But so that all that risk is saying is that every 3 years, we need to reset those rates, make sure people are still on track. And there is the chance that we got some of those assumptions wrong, and that employers are going to have to pay more than we said they were going to initially. You hope it goes the other way, and we can give employers nice surprises. But you can't always do that when you're dealing with things like modelling of life expectancy, which is really hard to do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. As there are no other hands up, no other questions, page 130, little 6, we note that the revised risk register of the pension fund. Can we please all note? All nodding and thumbs all around. Thank you very much. And for members on YouTube, the reason why we not it is and don't have any other methods, that is because we note the reports. We are not making decisions. With that, I am going over to page 143. And that is item 11, and we welcome Stuart Wells to introduce this to us. Hello, Stuart. Nice to see you. Hope
Hello,
you're well.
Chair. I'm very well, thank you, Chair. Hope you are too. Thank you. This is the first of what is intended to be a regular update on areas marked for improvement or development within the pension section. Ian has already touched upon the new structure that has been introduced to the section since the beginning of the year and the creation of the new teams within that. As the team manager of the Continued Improvements and Systems team, I did want to go through some of the key areas that we've identified for improvements. The first one is around our online portal member self-service. We're really keen this year now to encourage scheme members to sign up for the portal. We've since this report has been written, we're looking to introduce an initial monthly target of 650 members and an annual target of 7,800. So historically, the number of people that have registered since we introduced member self-service has varied quite significantly throughout the year. So whilst there'll be some months where we don't reach 650, we think that over the 12-month period that 7,800 will be achievable. We're also looking to introduce increased functionality to the website. We'll be working with the systems providers, Haywards, with regards to that. We're currently looking at introducing the online an online process to some of our retirement cases, and we're just about ready to go on that. We've already started to publish some letters directly onto member self-service for those scheme members that are already registered. So we're reducing postage by doing that, and we're looking at the moment to introduce as many as we can over the coming months. In terms of just touching again on the increased registration, we're looking to introduce various ideas to increase the registration, probably around Microsoft Teams and circulars and articles, etc. One of the other areas that we're looking at the moment that's really been highlighted in the sort of the COVID era is the way that we scan and print incoming and outgoing documents to the section. Obviously, with County Hall being generally closed for most staff, we have had to have people come in and scan where most of the staff were working from home. So that's something we're looking at the moment, and we're working with Central Print at the moment to see if we can introduce a new way of working, where essentially they scan and post our documents for us. So that's something that's very much ongoing at the moment. Employer risk. This is an area where we're looking to purchase a new tool to help with the monitoring of employer risk. There's a product called Epic, which we've just agreed to purchase from South Yorkshire Pension Fund. It's a product that they've been using themselves. They developed and used it themselves over the past few years, and it's got quite a bit of functionality which we think is going to be useful in dealing with the monitoring of employer risk. With regards to governance and office procedures, these are various things that we'll be looking at over the coming months, examining existing processes, trying to improve those where possible, looking to record more processes so it's clear and it's all in place. Should we require that, and also really looking at the impact of working from home and making sure that maybe some of the short-term processes that we introduced around March, April last year, whether there's better ways of working for a more longer-term strategy. And just briefly on employer training, although Ian did mention this earlier, we've managed to do a couple of Teams sessions for our employers recently. Seems to go down fairly well, and this has kind of opened up a whole area, I think, for us in terms of getting training out to more employers. We've got around the 200 mark in terms of employers. So in the past, arranging meetings has always been problematic in terms of inviting everyone. So Teams has certainly opened up new possibilities around that. So this isn't an exhaustive list. There's a grid in the appendix that summarises what we're looking at the moment, but undoubtedly there will be other items that get added to this throughout the year.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Stuart, just tell me on little 5, you're saying employers' risk, this could be through increased internal. So if it could be, how are you monitoring it now? Not at all, just talk me through that. And while you're talking, anybody who wants to ask a question, hand up, please. Thank you.
So we've got a spreadsheet in place that we use with a number of officers looking at that. It's not perfect, and it does allow us to do what we wanted to do, but we were really looking for a tool that would allow us to be a bit slicker and a bit more perhaps proactive in that area. This tool that we're looking at has diary systems and what have you, and workflows. So it just makes our lives a bit easier. So although we've been managing with this spreadsheet, we were all of the opinion that perhaps there'd be a better way of doing these things, and we think this is what Epic is going to bring to us.
Wonderful, that sounds great. And again, thank you for a really comprehensive report. And Manjit's hand just popped up. Over to Manjit, please.
Hi, Stuart. How are you doing?
Hi, Manjit. I'm very well. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick question in terms of your continuous improvement program. Again, just for my benefit, I guess. But we've got a risk register which obviously highlights things that need to be done, which may then lead to improvements. You've got your own suggestions in terms of improvements to the system. I guess there's also feedback from customers as well in terms of what improvements need to take place. Are they part of this list that you have here, or are they?
Yeah, they're not on there. I mean, we do have feedback forms that we're currently using, and yeah. what we've done is that when we start to use the online system for our retirements, we've introduced a couple of extra questions on our feedback form around the online process to get more views from them in terms of what works and what doesn't work. So that's currently what we have in place around feedback.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't want you to get bombarded from every single scheme employee with suggestions, but I'm just wondering what the process was for employees who could give you feedback. That sounds good. It's going to be automated as well by the sounds of things through the system.
Yes, it's the feedback form will be through the SurveyMonkey platform that we currently use.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No hands up, Stuart. You've done such a marvellous job. So in your report, so the recommendation is little 9 on page 145, and it is to note the report. Could we please note the report? Lots of noddings, and thank you very much, Stuart. I failed to introduce all the members present, but again, for YouTube viewers, they are listed on the beginning of the report. Mr. Shepherd, Mrs. Fairchild, Mrs. Panting, Mr. Gilbert, and I forgot Sanjit's surname, who's standing in for Divala.
Chair.
Thank you. Right. Now, item 12. Any other items which the chairman decides as urgent? There are none, but what normally happens, Manjit, it is at the end of the meeting, Ian provides us with a little bit of training. Unfortunately, we did not have a pre-meeting, so I don't know whether Ian will do that, and I hand over to Ian in 1 second to tell us whether he will or not. Ian, are we training?
We're doing something slightly different. If you recall, at the last meeting, we talked about the member self-service. And Stuart touched upon that in the presentation as well, about the improvements. So I've got my colleague Ian Potter, who's on the call with us now, and Ian's going to do a demonstration of the member self-service and the improvements and the areas that are kind of the new sort of areas to it as well, and also talk about how we're trying to